On May the 2nd, London goes to the polls, and incumbent Labour Party Mayor Sadiq Khan, the first Muslim to lead a major Western capital city, wants voters to elect him to a third term. How will his controversial policy on climate and pollution, the ULEZ, affect his re-election bid? What about his record on housing? Or his relationship with Labour leader Keir Starmer, who took a very pro-Israeli stance after October the 7th? Watch part 2 of my interview with London Mayor Sadiq Khan. You came out quite early, and boldly, some may say, for a ceasefire in Gaza, and your party leader at the time didn't. He took a long time to follow your lead. Last October, just a couple of weeks before you were calling for a ceasefire, you had Keir Starmer going on LBC and saying Israel has the right to cut off power and water to the people of Gaza. Do you understand why a lot of young voters, progressive voters, Muslim voters, including here in London, say we cannot vote for Labour when Labour is led by a party, by a man who endorsed what many would say is a war crime, saying cut off the power and water to people in Gaza?
Look, I mean, both Keir Starmer and other members of his shadow cabinet sought to clarify and explain what he had said, and he was quite clear in relation to him being explicit about the need for Israel to abide by international law. And what he said on LBC has caused huge distress to people across the country, not just Muslims, by the way,
yes,
non-Muslims as well. I'm quite clear in relation to where I stand on this issue, and I've been clear from the outset. By the way,
you wouldn't have said Israel has the right to cut off power and water, just to be clear.
Yeah, no, absolutely. But also, I talked about somebody with clearly a long-held track record of being pro-Palestinian. Many of the most pro-Israeli people I know are also critical of the actions of the Israeli government and the IDF. So it's really important to have equivalence in relation to what people feel, and indeed, many Christian people. Just speak to the Archbishop, to speak to Cardinal Vincent Nichols, they're also critical of the actions.
Well, many Christians are, of course, victims of the bombardment, Palestinian Christians. Okay, let's talk domestic politics in London. One of the things the American fascistic right has done is not just question the results of elections, but also try and make it harder for their opponents to win elections via voter suppression and bringing in voter ID laws that target poorer or minority communities who tend not to have the kind of IDs that the law requires. You have said that seems to be what's happening possibly in London this year with a new compulsory voter ID law that the Tories at a national level brought in. How worried are you that voter ID could cost you the election, even though you have a double-digit lead in the polls?
So the Conservative Party is the most successful political party in the Western world in a democracy. They know how to win elections. In between elections, they change the rules of the game to make it more likely they're going to win. So the last election that I fought in 2021, which I won, it's really important to explain the voting system in London. Two things that are really important to this conversation. One is, for the mayoral election, you have a first preference and a second preference. It's a transferable vote. And if you vote for a smaller party and he or she gets knocked out, your vote's transferred over. And that leads to good politics, right? Because it means I court smaller parties' policies, green policies, or policies in relation to young people and so forth, which leads to better governance. And so in the election in 2021, I won in the first round, beating the Conservative by around 5%. And the second round I won by a huge majority because those transfers came over to me. So what the Conservatives have done is something which is remarkable. I use that word in the neutral sense. They've got rid of that system. You know that you don't have a second preference. You only have one vote, which is a cross, right? So that means that the 5-point lead is all I've got to go on. I can't rely upon transfers over. The second thing they've done is, for the first time in the history of our country, brought in compulsory photo ID. And let me tell you why it's remarkable squared. There are 900,000 Londoners, 15% of our electorate who are eligible to vote, have not got photo ID. You need a driving licence, you need a passport, you're allowed an older person's travel card, but not a younger person's travel card. Why is that? Younger people vote Labour.
Possibly imagine.
Right. And so that 5% lead goes down to zero. And so it's been done deliberately. They've passed an Act of Parliament to make it more harder for me to win and easier for this hard right Tory to win. And that's why this election is so close, and it's really important that those progressives who may normally vote Green or Lib Dem or a smaller party, if they want a progressive mayor, vote for me on May the 2nd.
In some states in America, you can vote with your gun license ID, but not with your student ID. I wonder why.
Is that right?
You've often said that you've never lost an election, not as a parliamentary candidate or a mayoral candidate.
I can't remember saying that, but I'll take your word for it.
You can take my word for it. You said it. Not even when you were running for a school rep, aged 11, you won that race as well. And yet you're now suggesting that you might lose this coming election, your third mayoral election campaign, even though you have this double-digit lead in the polls. But your approval rating, when I checked recently, is at -18. Barely a quarter of Londoners, according to YouGov, think you're doing a good job as mayor. What happened? Why do you think that is?
Well, look, I spent a lot of time when I was deciding to run for a third term to look at our record. And I'm really proud of our record, despite 8 years of a Conservative government. We've been rowing against the tide of a Tory government. Notwithstanding that, for the first time in the history of our city, every child that goes to primary school receives a free school meal. We've frozen transport fares in 5 of the last 8 years, building more council homes anytime since the 1970s. One's completed anytime since the 1930s.
So why are people not happy with you?
Yeah, when you've been in office, often those approval numbers are a referendum on how perfect or imperfect you are. And elections are a contest between the two candidates most likely to win. It's not a referendum on how good or imperfect I've been. It's a choice between me and the Conservative candidate. I'm really proud of my record of the last 8 years. That's despite the Tory government. Just imagine having the wins of a Tory government behind ourselves. And that's why this election is potentially so exciting. I call this election a moment of maximum opportunity. There is a chance this year to vote for a Labour mayor and a Labour government. It's only happened once in London's history. In that 1 4-year period, we won the Olympics, we secured funding for the best rail line in the world, and we in 1 year built 8,000 homes. So just imagine Labour government, Labour mayor going
sequel.
forward.
You want a sequel. Okay, we have to talk about ULEZ, or the Ultra Low Emission Zone, which sounds super dull, but I will remind the global audience, it's a hugely controversial, big political issue here in London. Since August, you've moved to expand the ULEZ zone from inner to outer London. Despite it helping reduce air pollution, public health experts say it's a good thing for people's lungs, for young people. It's caused huge anger and controversy. The Tories say you're now engaging in a war against London's motorists. Your own party leader says he wishes you'd drop it, and he blames you for costing Labour a crucial by-election in London. Is your recent pledge not to extend the scope of ULEZ if you're re-elected, is that an admission that you went too far? Is that you signalling that you're accepting defeat on this issue? And if so, where does that leave the people with bad lungs who need that zone?
Sure. So I think this fighting climate change, improving air quality is the latest proxy for the culture war.
Yep.
You're going to see it in America in the presidential elections. I've no doubt about it. This is a culture war. There's no other word for it. What do I mean by that? So the air across cities across the globe is unsafe. You can't see the particulate matter, the nitrogen dioxide, the nitrogen oxide. It leads to more premature deaths across the world than tobacco. So that's the scale we're talking about. In London, around 4,000 premature deaths every year. Across the country, around 38,000 premature deaths a year. And across the globe, around 9 million premature deaths. Our policy, the ULEZ, which is cleaning up the air, has shown to work. In central London, we reduced the toxicity by almost 50%. We expanded it in London, we reduced it by a further 20%. I've now expanded it to all of London. So we have the largest clean air zone in the world. It's going to improve life hugely across
So why
our
make
city.
this pledge saying we won't go any further?
Yeah, I think you mean pay per mile. So what I've said is we're not bringing in pay per mile. ULEZ is now done, mission accomplished. So what I'm saying is, because we've brought in the ULEZ, which is the largest clean air zone in the world, it will lead to huge improvements in air quality. We're now going to move on to the next phase, which is making sure all our buses are electric. Currently, we have the biggest electric bus fleet in Europe. More than 1,400 buses are electric. I want all 9,000 to be electric. We've increased the amount of electric charging points in London. It's now 19,000. I want to get to 30,000.
Okay.
We have.
So those are all good things for the climate and for air quality. Your critics would say, how can you say you're a champion for public health, for air quality, for the climate, when you're the mayor who signed off on this new massive £2 billion 4-lane tunnel project in East London, which scientists, doctors, activists, environmentalists all say will increase emissions, increase air pollution, is bad for the environment. Doesn't this Silvertown Tunnel, which journalists say you tend not to talk about, doesn't it completely undermine your claim to be the greenest mayor ever?
Well, firstly, let me just address. I don't accept the premise in your question about experts disagree with the benefits of this tunnel. They agree with me in relation to the benefits. I'll tell you why. So if you go to the east of London, which is the poorer part of our city, for those watching this don't know, so if you stand on Tower Bridge and look west, there are 18 crossings. If you look east, there's only one crossing, because that's the poorer part of our city. So those in the centre and the west of our city have many river crossings. Those in the poorest part, east and south east, have one river crossing. It's a tunnel called the Blackwall Tunnel. It's a Victorian tunnel that's built on a curve to stop the horses bolting when they saw daylight. That tunnel is closed on average 700 times a year, 700 times a year. Every 5-minute closure leads to a 3-mile tailback. It leads to poor air quality, massive congestion. The most unreliable bus in London, a single-decker 108, goes through that tunnel. So what I'm proposing is a new tunnel which will have 2 lanes reserved for double-decker buses. So 2 of those 4 lanes you mentioned are reserved for fully electric double-decker buses. So reliable public transport going across that part of the river crossing.
You said you don't accept the premise of the question. Why did dozens of academic scientists write to you and to the Transport Secretary saying it would be foolhardy to press ahead with an infrastructure project that can only contribute to the UK's excessive greenhouse gas emissions?
Let me go into why they're wrong.
Okay.
Is because not only are we going to have this new tunnel within the ULEZ area, 2 tunnels reserved for electric buses, and it will be told we have air quality monitors during the construction and afterwards as well. So this tunnel will improve not just the air quality, it will reduce congestion and will lead to less particulate matter, less nitrogen dioxide. In fact, I put it into as one of the conditions of the consent order we agreed with the government. And here's the thing.
Hold on, but a future mayor could just get rid of tolling.
You can't, because the bridge is built on the basis of tolls that come in future years.
So all these climate scientists that I'm reading here, like Professor Kevin Anderson from the University of Manchester, all these people, they're all wrong and you're right about this.
No, it's not me, it's the experts that looked into the Silvertown Tunnel. They also compared and contrasted what's happening now versus what happens with the Silvertown Tunnel. And I can, I'll come back on your show in 5 years' time and show you the difference the new tunnel has made in relation to air quality, in relation to reduced congestion, and in relation to the traffic jams in that part of London. We
will get you back on as you're doing your, 4th, 5th campaign. We don't know how many terms as mayor you want to be. One of the other big issues you get hit on is housing. London is one of the most expensive real estate markets in the world. House prices are close to an all-time high. You're building new houses, you mentioned earlier, but not enough. Rents are up by 20% in the capital over the past 2 years. Your own party leader says he won't back you on rent control if or when he's Prime Minister. Would you accept that housing is one of the areas where you've fallen short over the past 8 years?
I accept the first part premise on the second part. So housing is the #1 issue in London. It's the biggest crisis we face, as indeed most global cities do. We've got what's called increased urbanisation. So if we were speaking 10 years ago, roughly speaking, 45% of the world's population lived in cities. It's going to be 60% over the next few years. That's because people are moving to great cities like London. For decades now, the supply has not met the demand. For successive governments haven't built the homes we need in London. So what we've done is a number of things. Firstly, we're now building genuinely affordable homes in London. The largest number of council homes anytime since the 1970s. The largest number of completions of homes anytime since the 1930s.
I'm not disputing your record.
No, but
I'm saying, does it go far enough, given the scale of the challenge?
No, it doesn't, and I'll explain why. So we're not meeting the supply that the demand requires us to do so. So what I've been saying to this government, and I'll be saying to the next government, is look, in the short to medium term, until we get the supply up to where the demand is, we've got to fix the private rental market, right? So what I have announced, which I can do without support of any government, is not just 40,000 new council homes, but 6,000 rent control homes, which will give confidence, I'm hoping, to future governments about why, in the short to medium term, we need to control the rental market. But at the same time,
what would you say to a London voter who says you can't even convince your own party leader to get behind rent control?
Well, listen, there's been many occasions. We just talked about one of them when we began this interview, about another issue where I disagree with my party leader about during the middle of the interview. You mentioned air quality, another issue that I disagree with. Look, London has want the mayor to be their champion. Okay. Yeah, there have been many occasions where I agree with the Labour Party nationally, but I want to move the discussion on with the Labour Party, and there are many occasions where I've agreed with the Conservative government, but disagreed as well. What voters for mayors want is a champion, an advocate, a shop steward for their city.
So on that note, we're almost out of time. You mentioned earlier, it's not a referendum, it's a contest, it's a choice. 30 seconds, make the case for why you and not Susan Hall.
Look, if I'm re-elected as the mayor of this great city, what I want to continue building is a fairer, greener, safer London for everyone. If the hard right Conservative wins on May the 2nd, she's going to take us backwards. I'm also somebody who has got a proven track record despite a Tory government. Just imagine what we could do with a Labour government. Rather than rowing against the tide of a Tory government, we'd have the winds of a Labour government behind ourselves.
And there's not just a mayoral election this year in the UK and London, there's probably almost certainly a general election. Your party leader, Sir Keir Starmer, is on course to win a landslide majority in Parliament, if the polls are to be believed. A lot of people would say that's more because of the Tory implosion, the Rishi Sunak, Liz Truss, Boris Johnson calamity, than because of any real love for a kind of cautious centrist Labour leader. What do you say to people who say Keir Starmer is basically 1997 Tony Blair, but without the charm, the charisma, or the good bits of Blair?
So I've known Keir for more than 25 years. We worked together as lawyers. I think our country's ready for a grown-up. to be in charge of this fantastic country. I think, you know, what he's done over the last 4 years is remarkable. He's changed the Labour Party. We had our worst results since 1935. He's rebuilt the Labour Party. He's held the government to account. I think he's on his third Prime Minister. And what he's got to do over the next few months, and he's going to do
Gaza, but yes,
is set out a vision for our country, and I'm confident he's going to do so. We've had 14 years of the Conservative government. And whether it's in the USA or whether it's in other parts of the world, elections are choices between the two candidates who are most likely to win.
agreed, but he feels like he's offering even less than Blair offered in 97.
Well, this time before 97, I remember vividly, you know, there were equally journalists concerned about whether Tony Blair could be a reforming, changing Prime Minister. I think what Tony Blair and Gordon Brown showed, imperfections though they were, we can talk about those, is that they transformed our country for the better. I'm confident that Keir Starmer and his team can do an equally good job.